What happens when one of Britain's most beloved acting legends walks onto a daytime talk show expecting a friendly chat, only to be blindsided by personal attacks and shocking disrespect in just 46 seconds of chaos? One host's outrageous comment would turn a simple interview into television's most jaw-dropping meltdown, leaving the entire studio in absolute silence. Ian McKellen sat down on the bright purple sofa of loose women, smiling warmly at the studio audience. The legendary actor, known worldwide for his incredible performances and his kind, thoughtful nature, was there to discuss his latest theater project. He adjusted his position, clearly ready for what he thought would be a pleasant conversation about his craft and his decades-long career on stage and screen. Denise Welch, sitting across from him with the other panel members, leaned forward with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She had a reputation for asking bold questions, but what was about to unfold went far beyond bold. "So, Ian," Denise began, her voice overly sweet, "you're here to talk about your new play, but honestly, don't you think you're a bit past it for all this theater work? I mean, at your age, shouldn't you be thinking about retirement?" The studio audience gasped softly. Ian's smile faltered for just a moment, but he recovered with grace. "Well, Denise, I think as long as I have stories to tell and the ability to tell them, age is just a number. Theater is my passion, and I don't see myself stopping anytime soon," Ian replied, his voice steady and dignified. Denise laughed, but it wasn't a kind laugh. It was sharp and dismissive. "Oh, come on, Ian. Let's be real here. How many more years do you really have left? Wouldn't your time be better spent, I don't know, enjoying retirement instead of hogging roles that younger actors could take?" The other panelists shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One of them tried to interject. "Denise, I think what Ian is doing is wonderful. Experience brings so much too." But Denise cut her off with a wave of her hand. Number. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. Ian, you've had your time in the spotlight. Don't you think it's a bit selfish to keep taking these big roles when there are so many talented young people trying to break into the industry?" Ian's expression remained calm, though his eyes showed the hurt her words were causing. He took a breath before responding. "I don't see it as selfish at all. Theater isn't about age. It's about talent, dedication, and the ability to connect with an audience. I've spent my entire life honing my craft, and I believe I still have something valuable to offer. Young actors can learn from working alongside experienced performers. That's how the industry has always worked." Denise rolled her eyes dramatically. That's such a typical response from someone who doesn't want to let go. "Look, I'm just being honest here. When I watch you on stage now, I just see an old man trying to relive his glory days. It's a bit sad, really." The audience was silent now, the tension in the studio thick enough to cut with a knife. Ian's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. "Denise, I came here today to talk about the work I'm passionate about. I didn't come here to be insulted or to have my career diminished. I've always believed in treating people with respect, regardless of whether we agree with them or not." Denise leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "Oh, so now I'm disrespectful. I'm just asking the questions the viewers want answered. You can't handle a bit of honesty. Maybe that proves my point. Maybe you are too fragile for this industry anymore." One of the other panelists spoke up, her voice concerned. "Denise, I really think we should move on to—" "I'm not finished," Denise snapped, cutting her off again. She turned back to Ian. "And another thing, Ian, all this activism you do, all these causes you champion, don't you think it's just attention-seeking at this point? Like you're desperately trying to stay relevant?" Ian's face went pale. His hands, which had been resting calmly on his lap, now gripped the edge of the sofa. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet but firm. "My activism comes from a place of genuine care for people and causes that matter. I've fought for equality and justice my entire life, not for attention, but because it's the right thing to do. To suggest otherwise is not only insulting to me, but to everyone who has benefited from those efforts. Denise scoffed. Oh, please, every celebrity does charity work and activism now. It's just part of the brand, isn't it? You're not special, Ian. You're just another actor trying to look good for the cameras. The audience began to murmur, clearly uncomfortable with how this interview was going. Several people could be heard expressing their disapproval of Denise's comments. Ian sat up straighter, his dignity intact despite the attack. Denise, I've answered your questions with respect. I've tried to engage with you in good faith. But what you're doing right now isn't journalism. It isn't even entertainment. It's cruelty disguised as honesty. Denise laughed again. That same sharp, unpleasant sound. Cruelty? Oh, that's rich. You know what I think? I think you're just upset because someone finally had the guts to tell you the truth. You've been surrounded by yes people for so long that you can't handle real criticism. There's a difference between criticism and personal attacks, Ian said, his voice growing stronger. Criticism can be constructive. What you're doing is simply mean-spirited. Mean-spirited? Denise repeated, her voice rising. I'm doing my job. I'm asking tough questions. If you can't handle the heat, maybe you shouldn't have come on the show. Ian took a deep breath, clearly trying to maintain his composure. I've handled far more difficult situations than this in my life. I've faced real adversity, real discrimination, real challenges, but I've always tried to do so with grace and dignity. I've tried to lift others up, not tear them down. That's what separates us, Denise. Denise's face flushed red. Are you saying I'm trying to tear you down? How dare you? I'm a professional. I've been doing this job for years. You come on my show and have the audacity to criticize how I do my job. It's not your show alone, Ian pointed out calmly. And yes, I am criticizing your behavior right now because what you're doing is wrong. The other panelists looked mortified. The producers in the background could be seen frantically speaking into their headsets, clearly unsure how to handle the situation. Denise stood up from her chair, pointing at Ian. You know what? I don't have to sit here and be lectured by you. You think you're so much better than everyone else, don't you? The great Sir Ian McKellen, above criticism, above reproach. Ian remained seated, his hands folded in his lap. I've never claimed to be above criticism, Denise. But there's a way to conduct an interview that allows for difficult questions while still maintaining basic human decency. You've crossed that line repeatedly today. I've crossed the line. Denise's voice was nearly a shout now. You're a guest on this show, and you're sitting there acting like you own the place. This is my panel. These are my questions to ask. And if you don't like it, you can leave. Ian looked at her for a long moment, his expression sad rather than angry. You're right. I can leave. And I think that's exactly what I should do. He stood up slowly with the same grace and dignity he'd maintained throughout the entire ordeal. The audience began to applaud, a smattering at first, then growing louder. Denise's eyes widened in shock. Sit back down. We're not finished here. Yes, we are, Ian said quietly. I came here to have a conversation, not to be attacked. I've spent my life trying to spread kindness and understanding. I won't sit here and be part of something that goes against everything I believe in. You're being ridiculous, Denise snapped. You're making a scene. Ian smiled sadly. No, Denise, you made the scene. I'm simply choosing not to be part of it anymore. One of the other panelists reached out to Ian. Ian, please, we can move on to different questions. We'd love to hear about your play. Ian turned to her with a genuine smile. Thank you, dear. I appreciate your kindness, but I think the tone has been set here today, and it's not one I'm comfortable with." He began to walk towards the edge of the set. The cameras followed him, and the audience's applause grew even louder. Several people stood up, giving him a standing ovation. Denise, still standing, looked around in disbelief. "This is absurd. You're all treating him like some kind of hero. He's just a guest who couldn't handle a few tough questions." But her words fell flat. The damage was done. Ian paused at the edge of the stage and turned back to face the panel one last time. "I've done thousands of interviews in my career. I've been asked difficult questions, challenging questions, even uncomfortable questions, but I've never been treated with such blatant disrespect. I hope you'll reflect on how you've conducted yourself today, Denise. Not for my sake, but for the sake of every guest who comes on this show after me." Denise's face was now bright red, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to find words. "You can't just walk out. We're live. This is completely unprofessional." "What's unprofessional," Ian said calmly, "is forgetting that the people you interview are human beings with feelings. What's unprofessional is using your platform to belittle and demean someone rather than to enlighten and entertain your audience." He turned to the audience. "Thank you all for your kindness. I'm sorry you had to witness this. I hope you'll still come to see the play. Theater is a place where we celebrate humanity in all its forms, where we lift each other up rather than tear each other down. That's what art should be about." The audience erupted in applause again, many of them calling out words of support and encouragement to Ian. Denise, realizing she was losing control of the situation completely, tried one more time. "Ian, if you walk out that door, you'll never be invited back on this show?" Ian paused, looked back at her, and smiled. "That's a sacrifice I'm willing to make." With that, he walked off the set, his head held high, his dignity intact. The camera stayed on him till he disappeared through the studio door and then slowly panned back to the panel. Denise stood there, her arms crossed, her face a mixture of anger and embarrassment. The other panelists looked at each other awkwardly, clearly unsure how to proceed. One of them finally spoke up, her voice small. "Well, that was unexpected." "He overreacted," Denise said defensively, sitting back down. "I was just doing my job." But the audience wasn't having it. Several people booed. One woman called out from the crowd, "You were horrible to him." "He didn't deserve that," another voice joined in. "You should be ashamed of yourself." The producers quickly cut to a commercial break, but the damage was already done. In those final moments before the break, Denise could be seen arguing with the other panelists, who were clearly not on her side. When the show returned from commercial, Denise was more subdued. Though she never apologized, the other panelists tried to move the conversation to lighter topics, but the energy in the studio had completely shifted. The audience was no longer engaged. They were still processing what they had just witnessed. Throughout the rest of the show, Denise kept trying to justify her actions, claiming she was just asking the questions viewers wanted answered, that she was being honest and direct, that Ian was too sensitive. But with each justification, she dug herself deeper into a hole. One of the other panelists, clearly fed up, finally interrupted her. "Denise, with all due respect, what happened today wasn't journalism. It wasn't even good television. It was just mean, and I think we all need to acknowledge that." Denise's eyes flashed with anger. "So now you're turning on me, too? This is my panel. I set the tone here." "Maybe that's the problem," the panelist replied quietly. The remainder of the show limped along awkwardly with forced laughter and uncomfortable silences. The chemistry that usually existed between the panelists was gone, replaced by tension and unspoken disagreements. Behind the scenes, the production team was in crisis mode. They knew this was going to be major news. They knew the clips would spread across social media within minutes, and they knew that public opinion was not going to be on Denise's side. In the green room, Ian was being checked on by several staff members, all apologizing profusely for what had happened. He graciously accepted their apologies and assured them that he held no ill will towards them or the show in general. His issue was solely with how Denise had conducted herself. "I've been in this industry long enough to know that not every interview will go smoothly," Ian told one of the producers, "but I also know my worth and my boundaries. I won't compromise my self-respect for anyone, no matter what show I'm on or how big the platform is." The producer nodded, looking devastated. "We're so sorry, Syrian. This should never have happened. Denise can be passionate in her interviewing style, but today she went too far." "She didn't just go too far," Ian said gently. "She forgot the basic principle of treating people with respect. That's not about being passionate. That's about being kind." Back in the studio, as the show wrapped up, the tension was palpable. The audience filed out quietly, many of them shaking their heads in disappointment. The energy was nothing like the usual upbeat atmosphere that followed a taping. Denise tried to maintain her bravado as the camera stopped rolling, but it was clear even she knew something significant had just happened. The other panelists barely spoke to her as they gathered their things. "I stand by everything I said," Denise announced, to no one in particular. Someone needed to ask those questions, but the silence that greeted her statement spoke volumes. In the days that followed, although we won't talk about the aftermath, it was clear in that studio in those moments exactly who had conducted themselves with grace and who had let their ego and sense of entitlement take over. Ian McKellen had walked onto that set as a respected legend of stage and screen. He walked off with even more respect, having shown that true strength isn't about dominating a conversation or making someone feel small. True strength is knowing when to stand up for yourself and walk away from toxicity, even when the cameras are rolling and the whole world is watching. Denise, on the other hand, had revealed something about herself that day. In her attempt to be provocative and generate headlines, she'd forgotten the most important rule of broadcasting. The people you interview aren't just content. They're not just vehicles for your agenda or your ratings. They're human beings who deserve to be treated with basic decency and respect. What made the moment even more powerful was Ian's refusal to sink to her level. He never raised his voice. He never resorted to personal attacks. He simply stated his boundaries, maintained his dignity, and removed himself from a situation that had become untenable. The contrast between them couldn't have been more stark. Ian, the seasoned professional who had faced real adversity in his life and career, handled himself with the grace of someone who had nothing to prove. Denise, desperate to maintain control and assert her dominance, revealed herself to be someone who mistook cruelty for courage, rudeness for honesty. In 46 seconds, from the moment Denise made her most shocking comment to the moment Ian stood up to leave, the entire dynamic had shifted. What was meant to be a simple promotional interview had become a masterclass in dignity versus entitlement. The audience knew it, the other panelists knew it, the production team knew it, and deep down, despite her protests, Denise knew it too. Ian McKellen didn't need to defend himself with angry words or dramatic gestures. His actions spoke louder than any rebuttal could have. By simply walking away, by refusing to participate in the circus that the interview had become, he had won. Not that it was ever about winning for Ian, it was about self-respect. It was about drawing a line and saying this far and no further. It was about showing that even in an industry that often values drama over decency, there are still people who will choose kindness and dignity every single time. As Ian left that studio, he wasn't running away. He was walking toward something better, towards a world where interviews can be challenging without being cruel. where questions can be tough without being disrespectful, where entertainment doesn't have to come at the cost of someone's humanity. Denise, left sitting on that purple sofa, surrounded by panelists who could barely look at her, and an audience that had turned against her, represented everything that's wrong with a certain type of broadcasting. The kind that mistakes shock value for substance. The kind that confuses being controversial with being interesting. The kind that forgets that at the heart of good television should be respect, empathy, and genuine connection. The moment crystallized something important about celebrity culture and media. Just because someone agrees to be interviewed doesn't mean they've signed up to be a punching bag. Just because someone is in the public eye doesn't mean they forfeit their right to be treated with respect. And just because if you have a microphone and a platform doesn't mean you have the right to use it to diminish others. Ian McKellen's walk-off that day became more than just a dramatic television moment. It became a statement about values, about boundaries, about what we should and shouldn't accept in the name of entertainment. It showed that real class isn't about never being challenged. It's about how you conduct yourself when things get difficult. It's about maintaining your principles even when it would be easier to just sit there and take it. It's about knowing that some platforms aren't worth the compromise to your integrity. For Ian, the choice was clear. He could sit there and continue to be disrespected, or he could stand up literally and figuratively and remove himself from the situation. He chose the latter, and in doing so, he gave everyone watching a lesson in self-respect. The interview that was supposed to promote his play ended up revealing something far more important. It showed the kind of person Ian McKellen is. Not when he's playing a role or reading from a script, but when he's faced with genuine disrespect and hostility. And what it showed was someone who, after decades in the spotlight, after facing discrimination and challenges throughout his career, still knows exactly who he is and what he stands for. Denise, in contrast, showed herself to be someone so caught up in her own sense of importance, so convinced of her right to ask anything and say anything that she'd lost sight of basic human decency. Her attempts to frame her behavior as just doing her job or asking tough questions rang hollow, because everyone could see the difference between a challenging interview and a personal attack. The other panelists caught in the middle did their best to salvage the situation, but there was no salvaging it. The moment it happened, the line had been crossed, and Ian had made his choice. As he walked through that studio door, Ian wasn't just leaving an interview. He was making a statement that reverberated far beyond that purple sofa and those studio lights. He was saying that no job, no platform, no amount of publicity is worth compromising your self-respect. He was saying that kindness and dignity aren't weaknesses, they're strengths. And in a world that often rewards the loudest voice, the most outrageous comment, the most shocking behavior, Ian's quiet dignity was revolutionary. His calm refusal to engage with toxicity was more powerful than any angry outburst could have been. That's what made the moment so compelling. It wasn't just drama for drama's sake. It was a genuine clash of values playing out in real time for everyone to see. And when the dust settled, when the commercial break ended, and the show stumbled forward, it was abundantly clear who had conducted themselves with honor and who had let their ego write checks. Their character couldn't cash. The 46 seconds that changed everything weren't filled with shouting or violence or obvious drama. They were filled with a quiet accumulation of disrespect, followed by a dignified response. They were filled with one person trying to maintain control through cruelty, and another person refusing to participate in that dynamic. And that's perhaps the most important lesson from the whole incident. You don't have to match someone else's energy when they're being hostile. You don't have to fight fire with fire. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to engage. Walk away. Maintain your dignity. Show through your actions rather than your words what really matters to you. Ian McKellen did exactly that, and in doing so, he turned what could have been just another forgettable daytime television interview into a moment that people would talk about and remember, not because it was shocking in the traditional sense, but because it was a perfect illustration of grace under pressure, of knowing your worth, of refusing to be diminished. 46 seconds. That's all it took for everything to change. 46 seconds from a cruel comment to a dignified exit. 46 seconds that encapsulated everything right about Ian McKellen's approach to life and everything wrong about using a platform to belittle others. In those 46 seconds, two very different philosophies collided. One that believed in tearing down, in shock value, in dominance through cruelty, and one that believed in lifting up, in dignity, in strength, through grace. There was no question which philosophy won that day. As Ian walked out of that studio, head held high, audience applauding, he didn't just win a confrontation. He provided a blueprint for how to handle disrespect with class, how to set boundaries without aggression, how to stand up for yourself without stooping to someone else's level. And Denise, left sitting on that sofa, trying to justify her behavior to panelists who wouldn't support her, and an audience that had turned against her, learned a hard lesson. That being provocative isn't the same as being profound. That generating controversy isn't the same as creating content worth watching. That disrespecting your guests might get you attention, but it won't get you respect. The interview that was supposed to be about Ian's play became about so much more. It became about how we treat each other, about what we value in our entertainers and our entertainment, about the difference between challenging someone and attacking them, about knowing when to stay and when to go. And through it all, Ian McKellen remained exactly who he's always been. A talented actor, yes. A cultural icon, certainly. But more than that, a decent human being who knows that fame and success don't give you the right to compromise your principles or accept disrespect. That's the real story of what happened that day on the Loose Women set. Not just a guest walking off a show, but a masterclass in dignity, self-respect, and knowing your worth. A reminder that in a world that often rewards the wrong behaviors, there are still people who will choose kindness and integrity every single time. And sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is the simplest one. Standing up, maintaining your composure, and walking away. 46 seconds that said everything about character, class, and the courage to respect yourself even when others